They lied to you about empathy. You were taught that to feel deeply is to be eternally warm, soft, and endlessly forgiving. But true empathy is not a comfortable blanket. It is a surgical tool. There is a rare psychological predator walking among us, one who weaponizes compassion not to heal the broken, but to hunt the abusers. They are the Dark Empath. They possess the terrifying ability to see straight through the masks of others, acting as an invisible, impenetrable shield for the innocent. If you refuse to understand this, if you cling to the illusion of sugar-coated kindness, tomorrow will be just as nightmarish as today. You will step back into the office, and the workplace narcissist will casually devour your boundaries again. You will sit at the family dinner, and the manipulator will spin their web of guilt around your neck. Pure, unconditional sweetness is absolutely powerless against these predators. Without claws, your morality is just an invitation to be consumed. But there is a way out of this slaughterhouse. Carl Jung, the pioneer of analytical psychology, laid out the map for survival. Shadow integration. By dissecting the anatomy of the Dark Empath, I will show you how to forge an unbreakable, sovereign self. You are going to learn how to consciously wield your own suppressed darkness as a defensive weapon. You will learn to see the matrix of manipulation and dismantle the manipulator perfectly and coldly, without ever losing your center.
The air in the open-plan office is thick with second-hand embarrassment. 2 desks away, a ruthless manager is methodically humiliating a junior colleague, stripping away their dignity sentence by sentence. Your chest tightens, but you do not look away. Instead, you step in. You do not yell, and you do not lose your temper. You instantly read the manager's deepest, most pathetic insecurity, and you deliver a single, softly spoken sentence that dismantles their entire ego. The room freezes.
You operated surgically, leaving no visible wounds, only psychological paralysis. You might feel a flash of guilt for this ruthless efficiency, but Carl Jung warned us about the trap of the persona. The persona is the social mask of absolute goodness we wear to appease society. It demands that you smile, endure, and suppress your innate defensive aggression. But when you strip away that artificial smile, you uncover a primal instinct designed not to harm, but to violently protect. What you experienced in that frozen room is the hallmark of the Dark Empath. They possess a highly attuned mechanism known as cognitive empathy. This is the precise ability to understand the complex machinery of another person's mind, to map out their fears and desires without being overwhelmed by affective empathy, the emotional contagion of their pain. You see the gears turning in the abuser's head, but you remain entirely detached, untouched by their frantic emotional chaos. We have been conditioned to view empathy strictly as a healing tool, a soft balm for the wounded. But this is a dangerous half-truth. In the hands of an integrated individual, empathy is the ultimate psychological radar. It scans the environment, instantly detecting the micro-expressions of malice, the subtle shifts in tone, the hidden vulnerabilities of abusers. It allows you to anticipate the predator's strike before they even raise their hand, giving you the tactical high ground. You have likely spent your entire life believing that your deep insight into human nature made you fragile, a sponge for the world's toxicity. But the moment you remove the moral filter of the persona, you realize this sensitivity is actually a targeting system. The manipulator believes they are in control, utterly unaware that your silence is not submission, but an active scan of their psychological architecture. You are already calculating the precise pressure point required to break their grip. The abuser thrives on noise, chaos, and the desperate reactions of their victims. But the integrated mind operates on a completely different frequency. It observes, it catalogs, and it waits for the perfect moment to reflect the monster's true face back at them. This brings us to a terrifying yet profoundly liberating question. Why is the most dangerous person in the room usually the quietest observer?
The quietest observer in the room is never paralyzed by fear. They are running an invisible diagnostic on the predator. This is the exact algorithm of the cognitive scan in action. When the screaming starts, the average victim's vision narrows into panic, but your vision expands. You map the psychological exits, you measure the inflated ego occupying the space, and you calculate the precise vector of your strike. The air in the corporate boardroom feels suffocating. A narcissistic director has just cornered a younger team member, tearing into them over a minor error to feed his own vanity. Liam, a senior strategist, sits at the table watching the execution. He does not clench his fists in righteous anger. He calculates. This brings us to a terrifying paradox. How does a protector use the weapons of a psychopath without losing their soul? To understand Liam's chilling composure, we must examine why pure goodness always fails in this room. Jung warned of archetypal possession. What happens when you try to embody the pure, unblemished hero? The hero operates on predictable honor. They raise their voice, demand justice, and appeal to morality. But this makes you rigid. It makes you incredibly predictable, and therefore easy prey for a manipulator who feeds on your outrage. The Dark Empath survives because they refuse to play the doomed hero. Instead, they embrace the Trickster archetype. The Trickster is fluid, morally ambiguous, and highly dangerous because they operate entirely outside the established rules of engagement. They do not confront the aggressor head-on. Instead, they mirror the aggressor's own psychological tactics, constructing an invisible labyrinth that the predator cannot escape. We see this dark machinery working flawlessly in Liam's mind. The director expects someone to jump to the junior employee's defense, a predictable emotional reaction that provides fresh narcissistic supply. Liam denies him this fuel. With a calm, almost indifferent tone, Liam casually redirects the conversation to the director's own recent, catastrophic financial failure. He slips the knife in with a polite corporate smile. This surgical strike triggers a fundamental, inescapable mechanism of the psyche. Jung called it enantiodromia, the psychological law where an extreme tendency inevitably turns into its unconscious opposite. Whenever someone projects an image of absolute dominance and infallible power, they are simultaneously hiding an ocean of repressed terror. The Dark Empath knows exactly where this terror is buried. By calmly and precisely reflecting the aggressor's hostility back onto their deepest insecurity, the Dark Empath forces this inversion to happen. The director's facade of absolute authority shatters on impact. His extreme aggression instantly flips into stuttering, defensive cowardice. He is neutralized, not by a screaming match, but by the terrifying realization that his psychological armor has been completely bypassed. You must understand that this is not a defense mechanism born of panic. It is tactical manipulation stripped of emotion. It shifts you from feeling helpless under the weight of someone else's ego to holding the remote control to their nervous system. You dissect the manipulator like a biological specimen, applying exactly enough pressure to collapse their reality distortion field. But wielding this level of psychological dominance does not come for free.
When you step out of the normal emotional flow and into the cold vacuum of the strategist, you isolate yourself. You become the monster that successfully hunts the monsters. And when the boardroom empties and the adrenaline fades, you are left entirely alone with the chilling echoes of your own terrifying capability.
The chilling echo of your own capability does not vanish when the conflict ends. It follows you home. It settles into the absolute silence of a suburban kitchen long after midnight.
Chloe stands alone, staring at her own reflection in the dark window pane. Hours ago, she successfully shielded her younger siblings from their mother's relentless manipulation. She executed the tactical defense perfectly, but the victory tastes like ash in her mouth.
Her hands are trembling slightly against the cold granite of the countertop. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply dismantled her mother's reality distortion field with terrifying, surgical precision. But as she looks at her own face in the glass, a paralyzing thought tightens her chest. Am I becoming just like her? This brings us to a profound and dangerous question. What is the hidden cost of knowing exactly how to destroy a human ego? To answer this, we must put the anatomy of your guilt under the microscope. When you successfully outmaneuver a manipulator, there is an undeniable, intoxicating rush. Carl Jung warned of ego inflation, a psychological state where the psyche swells with the godlike thrill of total control. You realize you hold the keys to their destruction. It is an addictive surge of dominance that can slowly, silently corrupt the protector from the inside. If you have ever felt that terrifying thrill of outsmarting an abuser, followed immediately by a crushing wave of shame, hit the like button below. It helps us know we are digging in the right direction, exposing the truths that most people are too afraid to admit out loud. Because acknowledging that rush of power without flinching is the very first step to ensuring it does not completely consume you. That crushing shame Chloe feels is a complex psychological misfire. You already understand how projection works when abusers project their own flaws onto you. But the Dark Empath experiences projection turned inward. Because you are hyper-aware of the devastation manipulation causes, you begin to project the monstrous image of the abuser onto your own necessary defensive actions. You judge your protective armor as if it were unprovoked malice. You mistake your capacity for violence for a desire to do harm. The cold tea sits untouched on Chloe's counter as her mind spirals into this trap. She believes her surgical precision makes her a psychopath. She feels immense, agonizing guilt for how easily she mirrored her mother's cruelty to maintain the family boundaries. But this guilt is not a sign of corruption. It is the ultimate proof of her humanity. A true predator never weeps for their prey. The core of this suffering lies in a fundamental misunderstanding of your own psyche. Jung stated that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Chloe's guilt stems from a deeply unintegrated shadow. Society has conditioned you to view any capacity for psychological harm as a mortal sin. You've been taught to fear your own fangs, believing that true morality requires absolute harmlessness. But harmlessness is not morality. It is merely weakness, waiting to be exploited. As long as you view your protective instincts as a disease, you will be torn apart by internal conflict every time you are forced to defend yourself. You must recognize that the fangs are a biological necessity. But what happens when the very people tasked with healing your mind tell you to pull those fangs out? The modern psychological establishment is hiding a lethal lie.
That lethal lie is sold to you in comfortable chairs with soothing voices. You sit in a modern therapy office, surrounded by pastel colors and framed quotes about forgiveness. The therapist across from Liam is urging him to soften up. She tells him to drop his defenses, to forgive the narcissistic director he dismantled in the boardroom, and to embrace vulnerability. She speaks the language of modern healing, entirely blind to the reality of the corporate war zone.
Liam listens to this sterile, positive vibe psychology, and a cold realization settles in his chest. He recognizes that if he actually follows this advice, if he removes his psychological armor and becomes endlessly forgiving, he will be instantly devoured. Worse, he will leave his junior team exposed to the wolves. This forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable paradox. Why does popular psychology want you weak and defenseless in the very name of healing?
The answer lies in how the modern self-help industry has completely sanitized the human mind. It promotes a castrated version of the psyche, one that demands the total eradication of your dark traits. You are constantly told to purge your anger, your cunning, and your capacity for ruthlessness. But Jung warned us that destroying these elements does not create a saint. It creates complete psychological impotence, leaving you unable to navigate a predatory world.
Look at the mechanics of this enforced vulnerability. When you are told to just let go of your defensive aggression, you are actually being asked to amputate your own psychological immune system. The therapist wants Liam to see his cold, calculated response in the boardroom as a trauma symptom to be medicated away. But it is not a sickness. It is an evolutionary adaptation. To surrender it for the sake of feeling universally positive is a form of engineered surrender. We must radically redefine what it means to be a good person.
Society constantly equates morality with harmlessness, the polite, smiling employee who never pushes back. But true morality is not the inability to do harm. If you are harmless, you are not moral. You are merely a subject of circumstance. Genuine virtue requires the capacity for absolute, terrifying destruction, kept under rigid, conscious control. Liam is moral precisely because he holds the sword.
This is the true anatomy of the protector. The Dark Empath does not reject the darkness. They harness it. When you walk into a toxic environment, your ability to read the room, identify the abuser's weakness, and strike with cognitive precision is your most valuable asset. You do not owe your vulnerability to people who are actively trying to consume your energy. Refusing to forgive an unrepentant manipulator is not a failure of empathy. It is the triumph of self-respect. This brings us to the psychological state you must achieve: the integrated shadow. This means fundamentally accepting that your fangs and claws are not character defects. They are not toxic traits you need to confess from a therapy couch. They are the essential tools required to construct and maintain what the Stoics called the inner citadel, an unbreakable fortress of the mind. You integrate the monster to stand guard at the gates of your own sanity. Notice how this integration shifts the entire paradigm of your existence. You no longer walk into the corporate office or a family gathering bracing for impact. The integrated shadow acts as a passive sonar, quietly pinging the environment. You allow the manipulator to speak, to inflate their chest, and to project their demands. You do not react out of panic because the walls of your inner citadel are secure. Your capacity for ruthlessness affords you absolute calm. Liam stands up, politely thanks the therapist, and walks out of the pastel office. He consciously rejects the superficial healing that demands his castration. He accepts his cold detachment, and the suffocating guilt finally begins to lift. He understands his darkness is the very thing keeping the lights on for the people he protects. But how do you deploy this sovereign weapon in real time, when the psychological attack is happening directly at your own dining table? The ultimate test of the shadow shield does not happen in a boardroom. It happens at the family dining table, where the oldest traps are laid. The air over the roasted turkey is thick with passive aggression. Chloe watches her mother launch a massive psychological takeover, playing the weeping victim to isolate Chloe's younger siblings. You can feel the familiar tension rising, the old instinct to shrink or scream. But Chloe does neither. In the past, this exact scenario would have triggered a chaotic screaming match, feeding the mother's desperate need for dramatic conflict. But today, Chloe's posture is relaxed. Her voice is perfectly level as she interrupts the tearful monologue with a single, devastatingly objective fact. The entire table falls into a suffocating silence. This brings us to the surgical core of our investigation. How do you break a manipulator's mind without ever raising your voice? To understand this silent execution, we must dissect the primary weapon of the abuser: projective identification. This is not just blaming you, it is a subconscious forced entry. The narcissist attempts to shove their own unbearable, unintegrated shame directly into your nervous system, demanding that you act out the chaos they refuse to feel. They need you to become the screaming monster so they can remain the innocent victim. The Dark Empath survives by structurally dismantling this projective mechanism. When the mother launches her emotional grenade, expecting Chloe to catch it and explode in defensive rage, Chloe simply refuses to open her hands. She watches the poison fall flat onto the floor. By maintaining absolute cognitive detachment, you become a psychological void. The manipulator's toxicity has nowhere to land, leaving them holding the immense weight of their own manufactured crisis. When the abuser's projection fails to penetrate your armor, a terrifying reversal occurs. The Dark Empath transforms into a mirror of truth. You do not argue with their delusion. You merely reflect their unintegrated shadow back at them with chilling clarity. Chloe does not defend her siblings with emotion. She states the timeline of her mother's exact actions, stripping away the victim narrative. She forces the predator to look directly at their own monstrous reflection. Because the narcissist's entire personality is built on avoiding their own internal void, this reflection is violently destructive. They cannot face the agonizing truth of their own emptiness. When forced to look into the mirror held by a completely detached observer, the abuser's false reality shatters. This triggers a catastrophic narcissistic collapse. The mother stops weeping. Her face drops, the mask slipping completely, as pure panic replaces the calculated tears. Look at the sheer mechanical efficiency of this process. The predator requires constant fuel to maintain their delusion, a substance clinical psychology calls narcissistic supply. This supply is harvested directly from your emotional distress. Every time you explain, justify, fear, or lash out in anger, you are feeding the beast. The Dark Empath weaponizes silence and emotional flatlining to sever this vital supply line, plunging the abuser into psychological starvation. By deliberately withholding the expected reaction, you perform an act of psychological asphyxiation. Chloe sits comfortably, eating her dinner while the architect of her childhood trauma suffocates on their own unspoken shame.
You do not need to destroy them. You merely stop keeping them alive with your vital energy. Without your distress to anchor their false reality, the manipulator is rendered entirely powerless, drowning in the exact silence they tried to use against you.
This is the ultimate anatomy of the shadow shield in action. It is not an act of cruelty. It is the ruthless enforcement of reality. You protect the innocent by simply refusing to participate in the predator's hallucination. The dinner continues, but the hierarchy of power in that room has been permanently inverted. The monster has been caged not by force, but by the devastating application of truth. And this profound victory paves the way for the ultimate psychological synthesis. That profound victory at the dinner table leaves behind a strange, ringing quiet. The hierarchy of power has been inverted, and the psychological storm has finally broken. You step out of the house and walk alone through a quiet city street at dawn. The air is violently cold and incredibly clean. The people you protected are safe inside, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the invisible war you just fought on their behalf. You catch your reflection in the dark glass of a storefront window. For the first time in your life, you look at that reflection and you do not feel afraid of the monster staring back at you. Chloe's battle was just an echo of the conflict raging inside your own mind. You have spent years running from this exact reflection, terrified that your cold, calculating insight made you broken. But as the dawn light hits the glass, you realize the fundamental paradox we have been hunting. Why is accepting your inner monster the only path to true peace? Peace is never achieved through surrender. It is forged through absolute synthesis. Carl Jung identified this as the final, most terrifying stage of individuation. It is the moment you stop violently splitting yourself into the acceptable ego and the evil shadow. You stop cutting away the parts of yourself that make society uncomfortable. By melting the predator and the protector down in the same psychological furnace, you forge the unbreakable core of the psyche, known as the self. This integrated self does not ask for permission to exist. A person gains genuine, unshakable power only on the exact day they stop apologizing for their capacity to be dangerous. The world has conditioned you to believe that keeping your sword dull makes you a saint. But a dull sword cannot defend the gates of your inner citadel. The sword must be razor sharp to keep the peace. You must possess the capacity for absolute destruction, yet consciously choose to keep it sheathed. This is the monumental shift from reactive empathy to conscious sovereignty. You are no longer a porous sponge, cursed to endlessly absorb the grief, the toxicity, and the chaotic pain of the world around you. You do not absorb it. You manage it. When the manipulator tries to flood your nervous system with their unintegrated shame, you stand like a stone breakwater in the ocean. The waves crash against you and recede into nothing, leaving you entirely unmoved and utterly calm. The manipulators and the narcissists will still walk the earth. They will still enter your offices and sit at your family tables, looking for easy prey. But when they lock eyes with you, they will immediately recognize the cold, calculating predator resting just beneath your polite smile. They will see the shadow shield, and they will quietly walk away. You have ceased to be a victim of your own sensitivity. You have become the sovereign architect of your own psychological borders. You must physically anchor this new reality. Right now, step out of the shadows and claim your autonomy. Go down into the comments and write this exact phrase as your personal manifestation ritual.
My will commands my shadow. Do not write it for me. Write it as a binding contract with your own psyche. Let every person who reads it know that they are standing among a legion of awakened protectors who refuse to be emotionally consumed by a narcissistic world ever again. Empathy without boundaries is a prolonged suicide, a slow bleeding out at the hands of those who refuse to heal themselves. But when you integrate the darkness within, your kindness ceases to be a vulnerability and transforms into an impenetrable fortress. You become the ultimate predator, standing guard over the innocent. Let the abusers test your walls, knowing they will only break themselves against your sovereign mind. Until next time.